Yo, what's up guys, Jerome here, and I just wanted to talk about Phase 4 and sort of all the emotions everybody's been feeling around it. After all, there's been a ton of emotions around Phase 4, maybe excitement, anticipation, but there's also been this sort of undercurrent of anxiety and fear of missing out. I mean, after all, this is one of the biggest patches we've ever seen in Classic. Let me let you in on a little secret though, which is that everybody's been dealing with that fear of missing out and the anxiety. The reality is that every single player has to deal with the same overwhelming number of options and choices. That's why I put together a really big comprehensive guide to exactly what you need to be doing for the next 6 or 8 weeks. It's the perfect way to make sure you don't miss out on anything and you maximize Phase 4. Alright, so the first key to avoid fear of missing out in Phase 4 is to maximize the Lich King raid. This is one of the best raids in WoW history with great design and even better lore. If you haven't been doing normal 10 and 25 mans every week, you need to get on that immediately. The secret is that the raid itself isn't really that different between heroic and normal mode. Your biggest goal should be to clear Lich King on normal before the end of the phase, which gives you the full experience of the raid. On the way, you'll have to deal with several roadblocks like healers messing up on Velythria. There's a new weak aura below the video that disables several graphical effects to make the fight much easier for your healing core. You'll also have to deal with difficult positioning and raid mechanics on fights like Blood Council and Sindragosa. ICC is really the first raid where having a weak aura pack is pretty much required, so I've linked the Thames pack below the video. As for the Lich King and other fights like Putricide and Blood Queen, these fights only get easier with more gear. If you're having trouble meeting damage and healing checks, remember they'll never be harder than they are at this exact moment. While you're progressing towards that Lich King kill, you should also aim to max out your Ashen Verdict reputation on every raiding character. It's very useful not only for the BIS 277 rings, but for crafting all the relevant new recipes. Once you've managed to clear the normal modes and finally slayed the Lich King, your fear of missing out will now move to not having cleared heroics. This is where comparison is the thief of joy, and it's a big source of anxiety. My guild cleared all the heroics the first night except the Lich King, and not having killed him in heroic caused my mood to really drop a lot. I had to remind myself though that only about 40 guilds have killed Lich King heroic, and it took over 40 days to kill him in the original version of the game. Frankly, any guild killing heroic Lich King right now is significantly outperforming the original design of the game, so really stop freaking out if you haven't done it yet. As for the rest of the heroics, I'd rank the 5 most impressive and difficult ones as follows. At number 5, we have Saurfang. The Saurfang heroic is definitely a healer check, and if your healers are great, it'll be a breeze. The big reason a lot of guilds struggle on Saurfang is that they want to maximize DPS, so they end up running only 4 healers. I would instead recommend always 5 healing the fight for safety, and just let your gear upgrades naturally make the fight easier each week. At number 4, we have Heroic Blood Council. This is a fight all about mechanics and personal responsibility. Although the fight's always going to be one of the most difficult for pugs, one tip for 10-man specifically is to run 3 healers. It makes the fight way more consistent in my experience. At number 3, we have Sindragosa Heroic. Sindragosa Heroic is surprisingly easier than it looks. The secret is to bring at least 7 healers and to use a weak aura pack to ensure the ice blocks line up properly. In future weeks, you'll be able to easily meet the healing and tank checks. At number 2, we have Professor Putricide Heroic. Putricide Heroic is really the ultimate mechanics check of Phase 4. Drilling your guild to react properly to every mechanic is the key. It actually took us a few hundred pulls on the PTR to originally get Putricide down, so really don't feel bad if it takes that many on live. And then moving into number 1, of course we have Heroic Lich King. One key is to make sure you have enough D-Sex for every infest, which means bringing 6 paladins. That is definitely more than most guilds are bringing right now. Remember that the Lich King will only get easier with more gear over time. There's also the upcoming Strength of Rin buff being added next month that'll help a lot as well. Speaking of that buff, let's talk about it. Hellscream's Warsong for Horde or Strength of Rin for Alliance is a 30% health, healing, and absorb buff. This buff is completely optional and is turned on by talking to the NPC at the start of the raid. Originally, the buff was added only a month into Heroic Lich King progression in vanilla, starting at 5%. In fact, the first ever Heroic Lich King kill did feature this 5% buff, so nobody killed him without it. Each subsequent month stacked another 5% on top, ending at 30% in July. In an interview, Blizzard dev Tim Jones did confirm the buff will be added very soon, likely within 2 months. That means we'll be receiving the 5% buff by December, and we may just get more than the initial 5% as well, since that barely moves the needle. The thing is though that while this buff nerfs the Lich King and makes the fight easier, it is entirely optional. If your guild is 2% away from killing Heroic Lich King and you want to say you did it legit, you absolutely still could. Either way, this buff was definitely designed for killing the Lich King, so you really shouldn't feel bad for using it whatsoever. If you've already killed the Lich King and you're stacked up on gear, one thing you might start getting anxious about is missing GDKP runs. GDKP runs are where item drops from the raid are bid out and then everybody in the raid gets a cut of the sales. I was in a GDKP last week where we made over 20,000 gold each and barely did any of the heroics, so I completely get the anxiety around missing out on these runs. After all, stacking a few 100,000 gold for Cataclysm is very tempting. If you want to get in on GDKPs, your best bet is to find the Discord for your server where all the runs are organized. In our case, we have one on Fairlena called Stacks where most of the big runs are posted. Frankly, going into the Pug LFG interface is a recipe for a 6-hour run where nobody gets paid. If you aren't looking to sell your character's services for money though, another system you should be taking advantage of is Gamma Dungeon Farming. Gamma Dungeon Farming is the #1 source of Primordial Serenite for BIS 264 crafted gear. Even 2 weeks after the raid has been out, Primordial Serenite's been really holding steady for over 1,000 gold each on my server. You should definitely be hitting several Gamma Dungeons per day and also hitting the daily for free Emblems of Frost. A new week I've linked below the video reminds you to loot both the items and turn in the quest, which has already saved me several times. It's also worth noting that you'll be getting a lot of emblems from Gamma Dungeons. You can downgrade these at a Goblin in the Sewers and buy epic gems for solid bonus profit. Also, don't forget to manually queue for Forge of Souls and work through the questline. That way you can have all 3 Frozen Halls dungeons unlocked to start getting them with Gamma RDF queues. As you work on raiding in Gamma Dungeons, it's also very important to maximize your gear. Most specs, like for my Resto Druid, are rushing the 4-set 277 gear as quickly as we can. The secret here is to soft reserve tier over anything else in 10 mans, as well as doing Vault of Archivon every week. I actually got a 264 leg in VOA, which put me an entire week ahead of everybody else in my raid. Aside from tier, you should also be trying to get 271 item level Lich King weapons as quickly as possible. If you want true BIS though, and you play a plate melee class, you can go for the Shadowmourne questline. The questline itself is extremely lucrative because you'll be rewarded with a 264 item level Shadow's Edge just for doing the intro quests. The second our Ret Paladin got his Shadow's Edge, he immediately started topping the meters, so it's definitely worth getting as soon as you can. As for the Shadowmourne itself, getting the 50 shards is much easier now. The normal modes drop the shards at the exact same rate as heroic. I'm doing a 25-man normal mode, which will eventually be my ticket to a free Shadowmourne. If you know anything about raid leading, this is the time to step up and make a run. After all, what's the point of full BIS if you can't top the meters or 2-shot healers in arenas? So this is the time to dive in and make the most out of Phase 4. I get it, these phase releases are designed to completely overwhelm you with content. But now I've given you all the tools to stop worrying and stop being anxious. You'll be able to stop stressing about heroic progression in Icecrown Citadel. You'll be able to blast gold making in GDKPs and Gamma Dungeons. And you'll be able to get full BIS to maximize your damage and enjoyment of the phase. In fact, I'm so relaxed now that I almost forgot to ask you to subscribe and join the community. It would mean a whole lot to me. And if making the most out of Phase 4 is something you're really interested in, you'll definitely want to make the most of Icecrown Citadel as well. And check out my Ultimate Guild Breakers guide to learn how to get around the biggest obstacles in the raid.